In the ancient days, Abram, later called Abraham, journeyed from Ur to Canaan, his nephew Lot always at his side. Their bond was more than family. It was a partnership of faith and friendship, walking roads marked by promise and uncertainty. Together, they built altars and called on God's name, sharing both hope and hardship. But as their herds and households grew, the land could not sustain them both. Disputes arose among their herdsmen, and so, at the edge of the land God had promised, they faced a choice: unity or separation. This is the beginning of a story found in Genesis, where the meaning of covenant, God's sacred agreement with his people, shapes destinies and tests hearts. When the time came to part ways, Abraham gave Lot the first choice. Lot lifted his eyes and saw the lush plain of the Jordan, green, abundant, a seeming paradise. He chose the valley, moving his tents towards Sodom, while Abraham remained in the hills, trusting in God's promise. Here the paths of faith and self-interest diverged, one toward the security of God's covenant, the other toward the temptations of the world. But before judgment fell, Genesis 18 tells us that 3 mysterious visitors, angels in human form, came to Abraham's tent. Abraham welcomed them with hospitality, not knowing at first their divine nature. One of these visitors announced that Sarah would bear a son and then revealed the coming judgment on Sodom. Abraham, moved by compassion, pleaded with God to spare the city if even 10 righteous people could be found there. This moment of intercession shows the power of prayer and the heart of covenant, mercy, justice, and relationship with God. In Sodom, Lot sat at the city gate when 2 angels arrived. He recognized their importance and insisted they stay in his home, offering protection and hospitality. But the darkness of Sodom pressed in. Men of the city surrounded the house, demanding harm instead of kindness. Lot pleaded with them, but the angels intervened, striking the mob with blindness and urging Lot to gather his family and flee. In Genesis 19, this moment becomes a lesson. Proximity to the covenant does not guarantee righteousness. Lot's choices placed him near blessing, but also near danger. The city's refusal of justice brought judgment. Fire and brimstone rained from the sky, symbols of divine justice and the consequences of turning from God's ways. Lot fled with his family, urged by the angels to escape without looking back. But his wife, longing for what was lost, turned and became a pillar of salt, frozen between past and future, a warning about the cost of divided loyalty. In the aftermath, Lot and his daughters found refuge in a cave above the ruined plain. Fearing extinction, his daughters acted in desperation, and from their union came Moab and Ben-Ami. These names echo both survival and shame, reminders that exile in the Bible means being cut off from home and hope, yet also the beginning of new nations. Lot, righteous yet compromised, became the father of nations, both kin and threat to Israel. Moab and Ammon, born of exile, would haunt the horizon of promise and judgment. Their story is a mirror. It shows how faith can be tested by compromise, and how the shadow of Sodom lingers long after the fire. In the end, Lot stands as a warning and a lesson. Proximity to the divine does not guarantee clarity or faithfulness. His legacy, survival under judgment, reminds us that kinship and covenant are never simple, and that the choices we make at the crossroads of promise and peril echo through generations. The story of Lot asks us, what do we carry from the ruins, and what do we leave behind? After the destruction of Sodom, Lot's daughters, isolated and fearing the end of their family line, made a desperate choice. In a cave above the ruined plain, they gave birth to Moab and Ben-Ami, sons whose very names mean from father and son of my people. Genesis 19 tells us their origins are marked by both survival and shame, a legacy that would echo through generations. Yet, their story would become more than a family secret. It would shape the boundaries of belonging and exclusion for centuries to come. Theologically, their birth stands as a warning and a paradox. Though born of desperation, Moab and Ammon would become nations, forever close to Israel, yet always outsiders. Deuteronomy 23:3 4 declares, "No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation, because they did not meet you with bread and water on the way, and because they hired Balaam against you." This law drew a line that would define generations, kin by blood, but excluded by command. Moab's people settled the highlands east of the Dead Sea, carving a life among stone and sun. Ammon built their stronghold in Rabbah, northward, their lands just beyond the heart of Israel's promise. Their gods, Chemosh of Moab and Milcom of Ammon, stood in stark contrast to Israel's faith. Altars of stone, rituals of fire, and the worship of war deepened the spiritual divide between kin, making their valleys places of both fear and fascination. When Israel wandered from Egypt, seeking passage through the land, Moab and Ammon refused them bread and entry. The wound of kinship grew deeper, so near to the covenant, yet a gate closed at the border. Their rejection became a symbol of spiritual separation, and the law of exclusion in Deuteronomy became a living reality. The memory of closed gates and unmet needs would linger, shaping Israel's view of Moab and Ammon as both kin and perpetual outsiders. But the story deepens with the arrival of Balaam. Moab's king, fearing Israel's strength, summoned the prophet Balaam to curse them. On his journey, Balaam's donkey saw an angel blocking the path, an unseen battle between the spiritual and the earthly. The donkey spoke, and Balaam's eyes were opened to the angel's sword, revealing that God would not allow a curse upon his people. Instead of a curse, Balaam was compelled to bless Israel, his words shaped by the Spirit, not by fear or bribe. This moment stands as a lesson. Spiritual warfare is fought not only with armies, but with faith, angels, and the unseen hand of God. Moab and Ammon, kin, yet excluded, became a recurring theme in Israel's story, to be near the promise, but not within it. Their legacy is a mirror, reflecting the struggle between belonging and separation, faith and exclusion. Yet even in the shadow of judgment, hope can cross the threshold. The law that once barred them would one day be challenged by a single act of loyal love. Ruth, a Moabite, would one day step beyond exclusion, her loyalty weaving redemption into Israel's story. Through her, the boundaries of covenant are redrawn, and the children of Lot are given a place in the promise. The story of Ruth stands as a bridge. What was once forbidden by law is transformed by grace, and the outsider becomes the ancestor of kings. In the tapestry of Israel's story, Moab and Ammon are both kin and adversary, woven from the same family, yet destined for cycles of alliance and conflict. Their borders, drawn in the dust east of the Jordan, would become the stage for faith, betrayal, and redemption. But the story is not simply about enemies. It is also a mirror reflecting how Israel's own choices shaped these relationships. Proximity bred kinship, shared altars, shared ancestors, but also rivalry, as borders hardened and trust frayed. The first great crisis came at Baal Peor, where Moabite women, at the urging of their king, seduced Israel's men into forbidden feasts and idolatry. Yet, it was Israel's own turning from the covenant that opened the door to this temptation, reminding us that spiritual compromise often invites conflict and discipline. In the biblical worldview, God sometimes uses neighboring nations like Moab and Ammon as instruments of justice when Israel strays. The lesson is not to hate these peoples, but to examine how unfaithfulness can bring about hardship and correction. At the heart of the camp, the priest Phinehas saw the covenant threatened. With a spear, he struck down the offenders, halting the plague and restoring Israel's loyalty to God. The zeal of Phinehas became a symbol of priestly courage and the cost of compromise, a reminder that Israel's failures, not just foreign influence, brought judgment close to home. These stories teach that the real danger lies not only in outside threats, but in the choices made within the community of faith. Israel's own idolatry and disloyalty allowed adversaries to rise. In the days of Moses, Moab's king Balak saw Israel as a threat and summoned Balaam to curse them. But curses turned to blessing, and so Moab tried a subtler weapon, seduction at Baal Peor. The crisis became a warning. Proximity to the holy does not guarantee loyalty, and when Israel abandoned their covenant, they became vulnerable to both temptation and discipline. In the era of the judges, Ammon pressed old claims, demanding Gilead, debating with Jephthah and summoning war. Jephthah, a warrior and outcast, answered with words and then with battle, defending Israel's inheritance. Yet the conflicts of this era often arose when Israel forgot their covenant, and God allowed neighboring nations to challenge them as a call to repentance. Moab too oppressed Israel under King Eglon, but Ehud, the left-handed deliverer, entered the king's chamber with a hidden dagger. With a single silent strike, he set Israel free, an act of courage that echoed through the land. These cycles of oppression and deliverance were not random. They reflected Israel's spiritual state and God's desire to bring them back to faithfulness. Yet, even in enmity, the lines blurred. David, Israel's king, found refuge for his parents among the Moabites, but later led campaigns against both Moab and Ammon. In 2 Samuel, David defeated the Ammonites and subjugated Moab, reshaping the balance of power in the region. These victories and defeats were shaped as much by Israel's faithfulness as by military might. The wars of David were not just about territory, but about the fate of nations. The defeat of Ammon and Moab marked a turning point. Outsiders became subjects, and Israel's borders expanded. Yet the memory of kinship and betrayal lingered in every victory, reminding Israel to look inward and learn from their own history. Through Ruth, the Moabitess, outsider became ancestor, her loyalty weaving hope into Israel's royal line. But the cycle returned. In Psalm 83, Asaph's lament rises. The children of Lot, Moab and Ammon, join a confederacy against Israel, their kinship twisted into conspiracy. Even here the psalmist's cry is not for hatred, but for understanding and repentance. The scrolls remember, those who once shared altars now lead the charge against their own kin. These stories become warnings and prayers, mirrors for Israel's faith, teaching that proximity without loyalty breeds danger, but redemption is always possible, even for adversaries. The true lesson is to examine our own hearts, for God's discipline is meant to restore, not to destroy. In the days of famine, Naomi and her family left Bethlehem for Moab, a land once seen as an enemy, now a place of survival. Ruth, a Moabite woman, enters the story as an outsider, her heritage marked by exclusion under Israelite law. Yet, through her loyalty to Naomi, Ruth's journey becomes a testament to faithfulness that transcends boundaries. In Moab, Naomi's sons married Ruth and Orpah, binding 2 worlds together. But tragedy struck. Loss and grief left Naomi and her daughters-in-law alone, adrift between nations and hope. Ruth's decision to stay with Naomi set the stage for a story of restoration. Naomi resolved to return to Bethlehem, urging her daughters-in-law to seek new lives. Orpah wept and turned back, but Ruth clung to Naomi, declaring her loyalty, a love that would change history and open the door to redemption. Ruth's vow echoes across generations. Where you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. In that moment, Ruth's covenant love, her hesed, became a beacon of faithfulness, drawing her into the heart of Israel's story. When they returned to Bethlehem at barley harvest, Ruth gleaned in the fields, gathering leftover grain as was allowed for the poor and foreigners. Her humility and diligence caught the attention of Boaz, a man of honor and a close relative, what the Israelites called a kinsman redeemer. In ancient Israel, the custom of levirate marriage, yibum, called for a close relative to redeem a widow, preserving the family line and inheritance. Though Boaz was not the closest kin, he honored this tradition by seeking the right to marry Ruth. At the city gate, before elders, Boaz publicly redeemed Ruth, and a sandal was exchanged as a sign of the agreement. Ruth's marriage to Boaz was more than a personal union. It was a legal and cultural act of restoration. As a Moabite, Ruth had been excluded by law, yet through faithfulness and covenant love, she was welcomed into Israel. Her story is a divine reversal. The outsider becomes the ancestor, and grace overcomes exclusion. Their union wove outsider into ancestor. Ruth, once a Moabite exile, became mother to Obed, grandmother to David, and ancestor to Jesus. her name inscribed in the scroll of Israel's kings. Ruth's story is a divine reversal, teaching us that grace can erase exclusion and that the boundaries of covenant are wider than blood or birth. Through Ruth, love outlasts loss, and redemption welcomes the stranger home. Her legacy is a sunrise over borderlands, a living bridge of Hesed, proving that outsiders can become the very heart of the promise. In the days before empires, Asaph the psalmist composed a prayer for deliverance, Psalm 83. Here, Moab and Ammon, the children of Lot, are named first among a confederacy of nations gathered against Israel. Their legacy, born in the shadows of a cave, now stands at the forefront of opposition, their names echoing through the scrolls as leaders in this spiritual conflict. The psalm lists Moab and Ammon at the head of a confederacy, Edom, Amalek, Philistia, Tyre, and Assyria, each nation summoned to oppose the covenant people. The children of Lot are not just participants, but leaders. Their kinship with Israel now turned to rivalry. Assyria is named among these nations, a striking inclusion in Asaph's poetic vision. The psalm does not recount a specific invasion, but gathers these names as symbols of opposition, highlighting the children of Lot as prominent among those who rise against Israel. Psalm 83 is not a prediction of a single battle, but a liturgical lament, a call for God's intervention as enemies gather. The children of Lot, once kin, now lead the charge, their story woven into the prayers and songs of Israel. The confederacy in the psalm is a spiritual portrait, nations united in opposition, yet ultimately powerless before God's covenant. The children of Lot, Moab and Ammon are remembered not only for their ancestry, but for their role in this enduring struggle. Asaph's words give prominence to Moab and Ammon, underscoring their leadership in the alliance. Their mention is a reminder that even those closest by blood can become adversaries, and that spiritual conflict often arises from within the family of nations. The psalm's verses become a mirror. Moab and Ammon, once outsiders and kin, now stand as symbols of opposition. Yet, in the sanctuary, Asaph's song is a plea for deliverance, a reminder that prayer is the weapon of the faithful. Through these ancient words, the struggle between covenant and opposition is renewed. Moab and Ammon, the children of Lot, forever remembered as both kin and confederates in the Psalms of Israel. Psalm 83 endures as a prayer for every generation, a call to remember, to resist, and to hope. The children of Lot, once sheltered in caves, now stand at the center of prophecy, their story a warning and a mystery in the tapestry of redemption. In the sanctuary, Asaph's song becomes a timeless liturgy, its verses echoing through generations, inviting worshippers to remember that the battle is not only against flesh and blood, but against the gathering of all that opposes the covenant. The psalm's poetic vision transforms history into prayer, and prayer into hope, a hope that God will answer even when the odds seem insurmountable. Generations later, Asaph's descendant Jahaziel stands before King Jehoshaphat and the people as the coalition armies gather at the border. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon him and he proclaims, "Do not be afraid or dismayed, for the battle is not yours but God's." Israel responds not with swords but with worship. Singers and musicians lead the way, and as praise rises, God sends confusion among the enemies. Angels move unseen, turning the tide. The coalition is scattered, and Israel's victory is won through faith and praise. The story becomes a pattern, a typology of spiritual warfare, where worship and trust in God overcome overwhelming odds. In these stories, the line between history and liturgy blurs, reminding us that the prayers of the faithful can shape the destiny of nations. The victory is not just a memory, but a living pattern for all who face overwhelming odds. The psalmist's lament becomes a mirror for every generation, reflecting the hope that God's covenant endures beyond every confederacy of fear. The prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, pronounce oracles against Moab and Ammon. "We have heard of the pride of Moab, his arrogance, his wrath, but his lies shall not be so." Yet even in oracles of doom, glimmers of restoration appear. "I will restore the fortunes of Moab in the latter days, declares the Lord." The scrolls and maps of prophecy connect past, present, and future, hinting at a mystery yet to unfold. The boundaries between judgment and mercy, history and hope, are never fixed, each oracle a thread in the tapestry of redemption. In Daniel's vision of the end, as empires fall and the Antichrist rises, Moab and Ammon are spared, mysteries at the edge of prophecy. Why are these ancient adversaries left untouched? Their survival is a riddle, a sign that even those outside the covenant may yet have a role in the world's last chapter. The scrolls invite us to ponder. In the unfolding drama of history and prophecy, what part will be played by those once counted as outsiders? Moab and Ammon stand as mirrors, reflecting Israel's own struggles with faith, fear, and belonging. Proximity to the covenant brings both responsibility and risk. Pride can lead to downfall, but mercy can bring reversal. The prophets warn, but they also leave the door open for hope, reminding us that the boundaries of grace are wider than blood or birth. The story of these nations is a living parable, one that calls us to humility, vigilance, and the hope of restoration. The story of Moab and Ammon is unfinished, a thread of judgment, kinship, and hope woven through Israel's scrolls. Even those born in the shadows may find a place in the dawn, if the call of covenant is answered with humility and faith. The rope is still being braided, the tapestry unfinished. What do Moab and Ammon teach us? That grace can reach the unlikely, that pride endangers the favored, and that redemption is possible for all who turn toward the light. Their legacy is a question and a promise, reminding us that the boundaries of God's mercy are always wider than we imagine. The dawn may yet break for those who wait at the margins, as the story of covenant continues to unfold. In the end, the tapestry of prophecy, poetry, and history invites us all to hope for redemption, no matter how unlikely the thread. As the final days approach, 3 prophetic visions, Daniel, Paul, and John, intertwine to reveal the ultimate deception. Each unveils a different facet of the end times, a tyrant, a deceiver, and a beast, all pointing to the rise of the Antichrist and a world on the brink of spiritual war. But the Bible's Antichrist motif is not limited to one person or nation. It is a recurring pattern of opposition to God's covenant and people. Daniel 11 describes a king who exalts himself above every god, Antiochus Epiphanes. He is considered an Antichrist figure, not because Greece as a whole was evil, but because of his specific actions, most notably, his desecration of the Jerusalem temple, known as the Abomination of Desolation. Antiochus set up pagan altars and defiled the sanctuary, an act that shocked Israel and is echoed in the books of Maccabees. In contrast, Alexander the Great, though a Greek ruler, is not seen as an Antichrist. He did not desecrate the temple or attack Israel's faith. Throughout history, other figures have also been seen as types of Antichrist, such as Emperor Nero, Nimrod, and King Nebuchadnezzar. Each opposed God's people in their own era, but the Antichrist pattern is defined by rebellion against God's covenant, not by nationality or empire. Paul, in 2 Thessalonians 2, warns of the man of lawlessness, a deceiver enthroned in the sanctuary, performing false wonders to mislead even the faithful. This Antichrist figure is empowered by Satan, his coming marked by counterfeit miracles and a great falling away. John's revelation expands the vision. A beast rises from the sea, empowered by the dragon, demanding worship from every nation. Miracles and signs cement his rule, as the world is swept into a global delusion, an age of counterfeit worship and spiritual warfare. These 3 texts, Daniel, Paul, and John, form a prophetic timeline. The Antichrist emerges as the culmination of rebellion, deception, and counterfeit worship, opposed by angelic hosts in a cosmic battle for truth. Yet Daniel's vision holds a mystery. As the Antichrist sweeps through nations, Moab and Ammon, descendants of Lot, are spared. Why do these ancient borderlands escape destruction? The scrolls hint at unfinished judgment, or perhaps a future mercy beyond the boundaries of covenant. Scholars debate the meaning. Are Moab and Ammon symbols of unfinished judgment, or do they foreshadow God's mercy for outsiders? Their survival echoes the story of Balaam, who could not curse what God had blessed, and reminds us that the fate of Lot's children remains a prophetic riddle. The true danger is not only in armies or empires, but in hearts and minds, spiritual deception, false wonders, and a global delusion that blurs the line between truth and lies. Angels and demons contend behind the scenes, as humanity faces the ultimate test of discernment. Daniel, Paul, and John, 3 witnesses, chart parallel warnings. Timelines and typologies reveal the pattern. Antiochus, the man of lawlessness, the beast, each a face of end-time rebellion, each resisted by the prayers and faith of God's people. The heart of the conflict is not territory, but truth. Who will discern the real from the counterfeit? The final battle is for the soul. Will we recognize the true Messiah or be deceived by the Antichrist's signs and wonders? As prophecy's tapestry remains unfinished and the rope of history is still being braided, the fate of Moab and Ammon lingers, a sign that God's purposes may include even those on the margins. The spiritual war continues, and the question remains for every generation. In the age of ultimate deception, will we recognize the truth or be swept away with the crowd? The story of Lot's descendants, the warnings of prophecy, and the battle of angels and adversaries all point to this. Discernment is the key to survival in the last days.